This is Michael Ostrolenk. Welcome to O Radio, where we explore individual and social transformation through collaborative action. Today's show is brought to you by Caspar Scafidi, an amazing body worker in the Northern Virginia area who has integrated different somatic practices, including Rolfing, into his work. You can learn more about Caspar's work at his website at casparscafidi.com. That's SCAFIDI.com. Today's guest is Martin Ucik, who moved from Germany to California in the 90s, where he trained with Eckhart Tolle as a Power of Now group facilitator, and later became an avid student of Ken Wilber's integral philosophy. This allowed him to integrate his relationships experiences into Integral Relationships, a manual for men, which Wilber calls terrific. Martin's second book, Sex, Purpose, Love, allows couples to experience a new form of love through sharing a purpose that makes the world a better place. Wilber calls it groundbreaking. Martin currently lives in Istanbul, Turkey, Los Angeles, California, and teaches worldwide, online, and in person. How you doing, Martin?
I'm doing great. How are you, Michael?
Good to see you.
Likewise.
So we both share integral theory. Obviously, we see that as an amazing framework to kind of organize the world's great wisdom traditions and social and physical sciences. And before we kind of get into how you use that framework to work with individuals and then individuals within couples, because that seems to be the thrust of your work, I'm curious, like what led you to originally to Eckhart Tolle's work and then eventually finding Wilber's integral theory that you then integrated into your total package of your work that you do today?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me on your show, and for everyone who's listening and is curious. It's obviously my deep passion that I live for. So any opportunity is wonderful. Good. And well, Eckhart Tolle was a total coincidence. In 2000, I played in a band, and the bass player found out that I was into Abraham Maslow and Gandhi and Viktor Frankl, kind of like humanistic psychology, and he said, "Oh, my wife just was at a conference in La Jolla. It was called the Inner Directions Gathering. At the end, there was this teacher. Most people had already left. Nobody had heard of him, and he just blew everyone away. So she bought the tape, and the bass player gave me the copy of this tape, and there was this guy with a German accent." Starting no expectancy, not waiting for anything to happen, just being here in the present moment, blah, blah, blah. And then after 1.5 hours, standing ovation. And I was just completely mesmerized by this idea that I could find happiness by being present, in the moment, which I had never even considered or thought about or heard. And bought the book. He was a few months later, he was in San Francisco, went there, talked with him, went again, found the Course in Miracles group, trained with Eckhart after I did a 1-week retreat with him as a group facilitator, and then facilitated for 5 years the Power of Now group at the Center for Spiritual Living in Santa Rosa. It was a weekly group. And 2 years later, I was married at the time, we have 3 children. I became a sensitive New Age guy, what we call a snack in California, and told my wife after 6 months of therapy that I wanted to be loved. What a concept, right? And she said, if you want to be loved, you have to find someone else. So, and that was actually liberating in a way, I think, for both of us. And that plunged me into the postmodern New Age Northern Californian scene of trying to have healthy love relationships.
Before you go down that path, let me ask you, at that time, and then reflectively looking back, maybe the definition might have changed. What did you mean you wanted to be loved?
I wanted to be loved. Yeah, that's a good concept. So I guess where I grew up in Germany, men were basically loved if they didn't beat up their wife and if they made enough money that their families could, have a good life. And that's what my father did. He was a very good man, but very emotionally unavailable.
Okay.
And I know nothing about the sex life of my parents, but our relationship had become sort of like a purely functional, my ex-wife and I relationships are purely functional for integral people, lower right quadrant, like in the social context relationship. And we had no intimate conversation. We had no sexual intimacy. We, we hardly knew each other on an interior level. And so at the time, I think I was very interested in the pure feeling of somebody deeply knows me and cares about me, and that we also heal and awaken together. At the time, I would say healing and awakening became just finding a higher purpose in life than just to make money and eat and sleep and raise children. So,
Okay.
of course, what love means that changes over time. And today I have a very different idea of what love means.
And
And
I like you.
and maybe I didn't even really fully know what it meant, because my therapist kept pounding back on me when I talked about certain people, said you come really alive. And when you talk about your marriage and your wife, you're kind of like that. And maybe that's what love at the time meant to me, to come alive and to feel, some life energy and some passion and a different purpose, different life energy.
So for conversation's sake, for folks who maybe have a slight grasp on AQAL, the integral theory model,
Mm-hmm.
where might you place that definition of love that you're seeking with your ex-wife? And then if you wouldn't mind, and I do want to hear more of your story, so we'll get to there. Well, let's start there. Like, where might you put that into the integral framework?
The integral framework? Well, at the time, of course, I didn't know about the integral framework, but it was a shift, what we would call from the exterior behavioral, right?
Mm-hmm.
That if we love someone, we don't beat them, and we kind of care for them in the material manifest world. And that would include sexuality, which was not included at the end of my marriage with my wife. So it was purely in the physical material world. But at the time, that wasn't even my biggest problem. My biggest problem was intimacy, what we would put into the, if you want to use integral speak, into the left quadrants, which is the interior, where somebody really knows us and reflects on us, on our thoughts and feelings and dreams and hopes and what we call into me you see, intimacy, right?
Yeah.
Into me you see.
I like that.
Yeah.
So then you said that you had this conversation, and obviously a divorce occurred, and then you went exploring the postmodern New Age Northern California scene.
Yeah.
Story from there.
So what is kind of a true story, it's kind of like became a running joke, is that the first time I had sex, I was very shy and insecure around women. So the first time I had sex in my life, I was 21 years old. And after this woman slept with me, a former classmate, 3 days later, I moved in with her and subsequently married her. And it was my first marriage. And then that lasted 7 years. Then I really had a hard time finding another woman. And then a second woman slept with me. And after 9 months, we moved in together and I married her. And so when my second marriage came to an end, I literally thought, if I find another woman and get lucky and the woman has sex with me, I'm going to marry her. And then since my second marriage lasted 14 years, I figured that will be then the rest of my
21
life.
at least, right?
Yeah.
Multiples of 7, sounds like.
And what I didn't kind of realize at the time, especially when I entered the Center for Spiritual Living in outer Northern California, and workshops around love, sexuality, intimacy, there were about 70 or 80% women there, and only 20 or 30% men. So the tables were kind of turned. Usually the women were hitting on guys and not the guys hitting on women. It was just a matter of quantity. And also I discovered internet dating, which removed this embarrassing thing that I felt as embarrassing, or this fear of rejection, maybe is the better word, right? Because you're anonymous, and when then somebody writes back and forth, then there is no more fear of rejection when you meet in person. And I was actually pretty good once I no longer had to have this fear of rejection, either when the women showed a clear interest in me, and I maybe was the one who said, I'm not interested, or on online dating. And so in hindsight, it felt like I was locked into a candy store. Right? And and I became somewhat of a sex addict actually, and love. There's a group, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, like Alcoholic Anonymous. It became so exciting to have this string of girlfriends and these opportunities for sex, but there was also a lot of heartbreak on my side, and sometimes on the side of the woman, sometimes on both sides. And in the Power of Now group, the people who know the Power of Now, there is a chapter on love relationships in the Power of Now, and that always brought up the most discussion and sharing, and also painful experiences. And in general, the people in this New Age scene, a lot of people struggled in their love relationships, which I thought at the beginning was kind of odd, because I was married twice. My parents were married for 50 years until my dad passed away. I wasn't even aware about all these struggles. And then very quickly, I found myself in this chaos, I would call it. So I remember I was in 3 states at the time. I was either terribly in love, not terribly, happily in love, but almost painfully in love, right? Or I was terribly heartbroken, or I was very desperate to get the next kick, so to speak, to find the next serotonin and oxytocin shot, so to speak, by getting to know someone new. And that went on for a few years, and I more or less ended up on my bedroom floor one morning being completely devastated, about just no longer being able to put up being put through the cycle. That was also after a few weeks after my dad passed away, and another woman who I thought will be the love of my life left me. And there was really this low point in my life, out of which then, jumping ahead, then the integral relationship vision emerged.
So would you call that like your kind of dark night of the soul, that time period?
Absolutely. Yeah. So 6 months earlier, somebody had introduced me to Ken Wilber through a CD set that time. So Eckhart Tolle and Ken Wilber, I learned about auditory first before I read. And was a friend who gave me these 10 CD set called Cosmic Consciousness. Yeah. And I drove from Santa Rosa to LA, which is about an 8-hour drive. So I could listen to 8 of the 10 CDs on the drive. And I got out of the car in LA, went right to a bookstore, and life was never the same. And then 8 months later, after I then read Ken Wilber and listened to conversations, there was this strange week where I got kicked out of the Center for Spiritual Living. My girlfriend had left me and my father died. Or happened all in like 4 weeks, and then I had this insight that if we apply the integral model, as I understood it at the time, to why there are all these difficulties in relationships, that would at least explain to me, why we couldn't resolve certain relationship conflicts. It just like hit me like lightning, and I scribbled on 2 pages on 2 sides of a page, the outline of the book, basically within an hour. So it's like a very raw idea, even though at the time thinking, I'm sure there must be books that apply Ken Wilber's to love relationships. And there weren't. I mean, I was really astounded about that. And that really completely changed my life.
Before you did the 2 pages, that sounds like it came through you.
Yeah, they came through me.
Talk about the dark night of your soul. What did that pop open in you or change in you?
Well, I think, first of all, there was this idea of Eckhart Tolle that if you're present in the moment, there will be happiness. And what that in general did actually led for me to more unhappiness, because I realized how many potentials there are out there that I had never realized in my life, emotionally and spiritually and interpersonally. right? As a businessman, it was all transactional. Relationships were mainly transactional. And then they became more of a humanistic and spiritual nature. And along, came this incredible growth. But if, as you know, when we grow, the old has to die before the new can emerge. And often this dying process of the old, before we even know where this will lead us, can be very painful, AKA the dark night of the soul. And I don't know if I really recall, but there was just this sense of hopelessness, right? It's no matter what I try, I cannot find happiness. And in hindsight, I know that I was chasing a form of superficial happiness because it was not underpinned by what I call purpose. The purpose just to find a new woman, to get sort of like this falling in love feeling, right? And maybe, and as good as this is, to do some healing together and to have new experiences, there was no telos in a way. It didn't lead anywhere, right? For what purpose do you want to learn, heal, and grow and awaken? Because in itself, it becomes sort of like circular in a way. And you always look for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, but it doesn't really produce, at least in my sense, it didn't produce anything that gave any higher meaning to me in my life. And so my life was utterly meaningless. I guess that's the best way I could describe it. And then having this idea of the book and starting to write this book gave meaning to all these experiences, and then all the experiences that followed. The purpose of that was to integrate it in the book.
For someone who's entering into or in the middle of their own dark night of the soul, what might you recommend that served you to get through to the other side that might serve them?
Well, the best I know is, and that's why I wrote the second book, Sex, Purpose, Love. And sex means, it's a noun, right? The sexes, how the sexes interact with each other, and purpose, find, as, of course, that having a spiritual path, depending on what nature your dark of the night soul is, right? I mean, it can be a spiritual crisis. It can be, in a sense, a biological crisis that we grow older and our body changes, health challenges. It can be a financial crisis. Did I mention the psychological crisis? I already forget. Right? So if we put it into the 4 quadrants, there can be different reasons. And for me, I think, I mean, I'm not a therapist and not a super expert in this field, but if you really go deep inside of you and find what are your innate talents, which fall in 4 groups of either creating more goodness, more truth, more beauty, or more function, or science, morals, aesthetics, and kinesthetics in a way, to making practical things. And to find that out and to see where you have the skills and how you can put yourself in serving humanity in some way, even if it's only a few people, right? Be of service to others. That is proven, besides having healthy relationships, to bring lasting happiness and more health, longer life span, and so on and so forth. There's only 3 things that are proven to create happiness. And money is like partially a little bit of that. You need some money to enact your purpose, but it's not at the core of these 3. One is to have healthy relationships. One is to have healthy body, mind, and one is to live your purpose. These are the 3.
Nice.
And that's why I wrote Sex, Purpose, Love in a way too.
So tell me about your purpose.
These 3. Well, so purpose is it's not something we do. It's something that we feel called to, or it's nothing concrete, right? Today I could say my purpose is to support singles and couples to co-create healthy relationships. But if I look at my whole life, what I always have done is that I brought people to co-create together, brought people together to co-create together. So in my earlier life, that was in bands. When I was a musician, I always had sort of like a knack for not only who would be the best musician, but also who would be the best fit from his character, and to form bands that could perform together. And then I became an entrepreneur in 1982, and I built companies, and my greatest joy was just to hire people that complement each other and create synergy and work together as teams. I didn't study that. I'm a high voltage electrician by training, so I had no freaking idea about this, but I just have a natural talent for that, I think. And then I brought people together in these spiritual groups. And then I started an organization called Singles to Couples. It just my passion narrowed more and more down to intimate love relationships, and that probably comes from my own difficulties at the beginning to co-create healthy relationships. And I got lucky twice, right, to find women who would marry me, and that was fine for the time. And so my deeper purpose is to bring people together to co-create. And right now, like concretely right now, I'm offering a training for integral relationship group facilitators. And because of COVID, I could no longer bring people together here in Istanbul, where I started the Integral Center again, this idea of bringing people together. And to my surprise, we have 135 people in 25 nations who come together on Zoom every week to practice, to become integral relationship group facilitators. And that just gives meaning and joy to my life. If I cannot bring people together to co-create, my life feels utterly lonely and meaningless. And I would probably fall back in the dark night of the soul if I could not do this. And I think it's somewhat misguided, right? Some people might say, well, if he would be really spiritual, he would be happy to sit alone in his room in Istanbul and just, be blissfully in the moment. But I'm now a fan of what's called evolutionary enlightenment, that we go beyond this rather surrendered, somewhat passive, right? Being present in the moment and really be a part of the evolution of humanity. I no longer really use the term evolution, but be in service of the betterment of humanity from this spiritual place of surrender and presence.
And I love the fact that it's not hyperagenic, it's relationship based. So
Yes.
this would be a nice segue to talk about what is an integral approach to relationships.
Yeah, that is so usually I know who I'm talking to, and so I find words, right, that would resonate with that person. And since we have a larger audience, right, some people may not be integrally informed. I'm now shying away to use two terms that are too technical, but integral in itself means to bring, and maybe that's already too technical, differentiated parts into a functional whole. And I use for women more the example of a garden, for guys more the example of a car, right? Where to understand how a garden really functions or a car really functions, you first have to differentiate the parts of the car, or all the elements, the bugs, the roots, the soil, the sun, the water, right? The plants of a garden. But then if you have everything taken apart and the pieces are basically laying there, that's not a functional system. Then you also need to know how they integrate with each other to create a functional whole. And in an integral relationship, we would talk to someone or understand someone, what they would see sort of like as the important parts to make a love relationship work. And so we could think about, well, there's the physical body, right? So you somehow connect on a physical level. There is your interior awareness, your consciousness, your feelings. And then there is some ways how you communicate them with your partner to create shared understandings and this into me you see, this intimacy, right? The emotional intimacy. And then you also want to share a lifestyle. There's like a physical material aspect to it, like money and who takes out the trash and where you live, and maybe hobbies, where you vacation, right? And so you have 4 dimensions that seem essential to me for a healthy relationship. And lo and behold, that represents the four quadrants in integral theory, or the four dimensions of our being. And so the first step in an integral relationship for me would be that it is healthy in these four dimensions, right? That we're psychologically, emotionally healthy, that we can communicate our feelings, create emotional intimacy, we share our interior, we're interested about the interior of our partner, we have a healthy sexuality, and also how we keep our body healthy, right? How we eat, how we exercise, how we sleep, how we medicate, right? That we have shared values about the well-being of our physical body, which is then also helpful for our sexuality, and that we have shared values around material things in the widest things, lifestyle, money, right? And then maybe children and all these things.
You know, in your many years of working with couples, is there a dynamic that you've noticed that stands out as more prevalent among them? Like, is it emotional issues and learning how to communicate effectively? Is it energetics? Is it health of the physical body? Is it taking out the trash? Is there anything, and also, is there anything that you could say specific to the gender? You know, if it's a male or it's a female, is there anything that stands out as that fits in with one of those two categories?
Well, if integral would be so easy that it's just understanding these four dimensions, right? Then Wilbur wouldn't have written 20 books that are about 3 or 4 feet of shelf space.
Got the mic back there.
Yeah, like you're there. And so to answer your question, I think it's important to integrate the next thing that Wilbur did, is that in all of these four dimensions, there are growth hierarchies in there. So people are at different levels of development in these dimensions, specifically in their value system and worldviews, right? How they make meaning, or how they would answer the question, what is a functional human being, for example, right? And because that leads to different needs in these areas, depending on what level you are. And this usually poses greater challenges in relationships if couples are at, let's just simply say, at different levels of development or consciousness development, than to say, you know, where are the problems mainly located? You know, are they mainly about money and the trash or sexuality? Because what happens if, to come back in these four dimensions, if you have a dissonance or a challenge, right, or conflicts in one of these four dimensions, it almost like a bad apple, right, in a bowl, it infects all the other three dimensions. And very often, let's say, you know, you would be with a woman, your challenge may be in one of these four areas, and her challenge may be in another one of these four areas, right? So you may be happy with the sex life, but she may not be happy with the sex life, and she may be happy with whatever the money that you make, but you're not happy with something else there. So, and then that really creates this, because it's 2 times 4 dimensions that try to co-create a relationship, right? And if the development in some dimensions is not equal, then that creates in itself problems. But if one person is happy in one dimension, the other one is not happy, then that, and so then it gets quickly quite complex, right?
I would imagine it's even more complex when you add in the growth hierarchies, if you're looking at value systems, cognitive complexity, morals, you know, there's all these various lines of development. So it's not only just 8, it's a multiplicity of complexity.
And to be very simplistic, right? If some person says, we can easily live on $40,000 a year, this is very environmentally conscious, right? We're just going to tone down on material things and have a simple lifestyle. And for the other person, right, $1 million is sort of like where we start talking, right? Then it's just a value disconnect that you would have. And And that's the same, let's say, around sexuality. If somebody says, well, once a week kind of missionary style is fine, and the other one wants to practice tantra, or maybe have an open or polyamorous relationship, a sexual relationship, right? There's so many variations then, but they're usually all based in what is our core, as you just said, consciousness or value system around these things.
How does the purpose, like how do you bring in purpose inside a relationship? I understood you talked about an individual's purpose and how it can express itself differently over time. But then how does purpose show up inside of a relationship in the work that you guys do?
So that was so I give a little context how that happened, because I spent 4 years writing Integral Relationships, a Manual for Men. And at the time I thought, you know, when you fall in love with someone, then, you know, and at the time wrongly, I thought so like love is unconditional, kind of like this new age kind of idea, right? And the only problem is maybe a little bit like in a less sophisticated way coming from Eric Fromm, that you just don't have the relationship skills to sustain the love relationship. And so integral relationships really educated myself and then inspired other people to really look at these differences in these 4 dimensions and the levels. And so I thought, you know, if you get together with someone who's at the same level of development roughly and wants to heal and learn and grow, and you can manage to have it healthy in all 4 quadrants, then you should be able to have a sustainable love relationship. That was sort of like my idea. And then in 2013, I finished the book. In 2012, I did a workshop in New York, and there was a young woman, very sexy, very pretty, and she really, really wanted to be in a relationship with me. And so we got together, and she moved to California. And after a year, this relationship crashed. And I was just like not only personally devastated, but I was also really embarrassed, right, in the integral community where we had presented ourselves so like as an integral couple. It was a very humiliating experience. And during that time, what broke my heart even almost more or even more was this missed opportunity, what we could have done together in the world, at least what I felt. We, as a couple, we could have done so much more powerfully than I could have done by myself. And then once I recovered after 2 years from that breakup, I wanted to investigate this question of shared purpose. So that's how I came to the second book. And also the third part, that I also then looked at love from an integral perspective and not only at relating. So these were 2 things that were not mistakes, but they were clearly missing from my first book, the shared purpose and to look at love from an integral perspective. So when I thought about, so that's the little introduction. When I thought about purpose, the first insight I had that still seems to hold up very well with people who read my second book is that we have a biological purpose that we share with all living things to survive and to procreate and to form groups. And importantly, to seek quality of life. Like even all animals basically always go for the best possible quality of life given the available food resources and circumstances and things like that. And we humans do that too. So that's where money comes in handy, because it usually increases your quality of life. And a lot of women specifically choose partners who increase their quality of life. We men are more looking for women who are sexy and we can have great sex with. Women usually look for guys who increase their quality of life, very stereotypically speaking.
Is that unique to the West, or do you think that's unique to our species? Is that time constrained? Like that's just modern?
That seems to be universal. So Donald Simmons wrote this, The Evolution of Sex, in 1980 or so, and he did research in whatever 30, 40 countries. So this seems to be universal. And I lived in Germany and in the US, and now I live in Turkey, and I taught in Australia, in Moscow, not all over the world, but that seems to be a universal. Of course, that's not true for everyone, but just generally speaking. And then I realized, and there is a book, if anybody wants to look that up, called The Complexity of Greatness. And in this book, they found out that humans have through 4 genetic predispositions for talent, which was really astounding to me, right, to read this. And I already kind of mentioned it. It's for either for cognitive intelligence or for artistic creativity or for empathy and for practical skills. And then it dawned on me that if you think about, if you read a lot of dating profiles, in some way, women say, I want to have a good-looking guy who's intelligent, who can entertain me or is artistic, who's good to me, right? He can be aggressive towards others, but he has to be good to me as a wife or as a partner, and he has to be able to fix stuff around the house, right? Every woman in one way or another expresses that. And then I thought back about human history, and it became clear to me that a few 100,000 years ago, just the guys with the biggest muscles was often outsmarted, right? Or was, by guys who were more intelligent. And if they all beat up their wives, they were not very popular, probably. So if a guy had some level of empathy for his wife and his children and could create art, right? I mean, art, if you go way back, like 30, 40, 50,000 years, you find cave paintings, you find figurines, you find body decoration. Art has been a big part of our life, right? And it was mainly, we could assume, males who created this art in order to impress and to attract females. And of course, guys who can make fire and invent the wheel and make weapons and stuff like that. So these are the 4 qualities, and because women selected for these 4 qualities in men, they became genetically encoded in males and females over time. And so everyone has the genetic predisposition, and they're not equal, right? Some people are more cognitively intelligent, some people are more artistically intelligent, some people have this big empathy, right? Think about morals and how can we get along as a species. And some guys or some women, some people are very practical with their hands, or dancing or sports or stuff like that, or create functional systems. And so that's at the root. And then, of course, you need to develop this. First, you need to develop the brain and your body between age, from conception to maybe age 5 or 6, right? So you have the foundation. And then from there, you need to develop the skills in order to enact your purpose. And not everybody has the opportunity to develop the skills to enact their purpose. Like, I wanted to be a musician and a chef and bring people together to co-create. And my father said, no, I'm a 3rd generation high voltage electrician. So you're my son, you have to become a high voltage electrician too. And I was kind of dumb like a brick, right? I barely made it through the training because my technical cognitive intelligence, I'm not genetically predispositioned for stuff like that. I can think in big structures and write big books, but I cannot figure out a simple mathematical formula or even calculate the time correctly to have our conversation this evening, right? I mess stuff up like that all the time, right? So, and historically, of course, males had the rights and responsibilities in what we call the public sphere, right? And females were relegated to the domestic sphere. So it was mainly males who could develop the skills to live their purpose. So if you look through history, it's mainly male artists, male politicians, male philosophers, male, right? And the women were basically birth machines and supporting at best their males in their purpose in the public sphere, with few exceptions. And now, of course, in modernity and post-modernity, since women have the same genes, obviously, and go even more to university now than boys do, at least in America, I think we need a new framework for relationships, because we don't really know how to deal with these modern and postmodern relationships. Many people don't know how to deal with it. And so what I experienced was that if a couple goes together and they have also a shared purpose, right, that can be in any of these few fields. I'm very good friends with Alex and Alison Gray, for example, the artists that you may know of, right? I was just invited last fall to their COSM Center in North upstate New York, right? And
Nice.
he gave a workshop there and a talk, and there's like, or Bill and Melinda Gates, or maybe Bill and Hillary Clinton, you know, without judging anything that they're doing, but you could see in these couples that they could not do, or Michelle and Barack Obama, right? They could not do on their own what they're able to do as a couple, right? We usually refer to them as a power couple. And that's sort of like my vision for the future of relationships. Now, the trick is, of course, and I know you have a question, if you're already in a relationship and you don't share a purpose, right, this can be very bad news. I mean, I literally had people who got very depressed and said, yeah, I feel really passionate about this thing, and I would love to share it with a partner, but my wife is, or my partner, can go both ways, is interested in watching TV and drinking beer or whatever, right, has not really enacted their purpose, or they have a very different purpose. So that can be very bad news, but it can be also great news for people who never realized it, and for single people who can add that to their dating profile and can say, yes, I want to show up in the world living my purpose, and through that attracting someone who has the same purpose but found a different way of expression. So there, it gets a little more complicated there, but I'll pause at this moment.
So someone could read your book or work with one of your certified trainers,
Mm.
and part of that would be to figure out what their individual purpose is, and then
Yes.
through a co-creative process, determine whether it's a joint purpose. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are specific purpose guides, and there are about 30 or so books that help you to find your purpose. So I'm more a person who points to these different strategies, and very briefly, there are 4 broad methods to identify your purpose, which I call the autobiographical purpose, where you just look back and say, where did I experience the greatest joy, the greatest bliss, the best flow in my life, right? And you then look, what did I do? And then you see if you can make a living doing that. I mean, very often the big difficulty is that we may feel very that our purpose and our calling is to maybe be a musician or to be something, but it doesn't pay much or anything, right? So this is where it gets a little bit more complex. But there is always then expressions how we can also make money, right? There's these 4 circles: what you love to do, what you do well, what the world needs, and what the world pays for. And so you want to see if you cover all these 4 areas. So that would be more the autobiographical method. The other one I call the absence method, and that for 2 reasons. A, you really don't know what brought you real deep joy in your life, right? So that there wasn't this, when you look back into your life, life kind of sucked overall, and everything that brought me joy wasn't really like, didn't seem like a purpose, right? It was more like hedonistic. So a purpose is, of course, not hedonistic, avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, right? And so saying, oh, when I was on the vacation, or when I fell in love, or when I hang out with my buddies watching TV, that brings me joy and bliss, but it's not a purpose, right? So obviously, and so it's kind of absent. So there are some deeper introspective methods, but the core question I asked there is, what is the biggest pain? What do you feel is absent in the world, like love, or more art, more beauty, or more equality? What do you feel is absent in the world, and you're called to absent this absence?
Got it.
It's
Yeah.
Roy Bhaskar, Absencing Absences. Like, there was no integral relationship book, right? It was absent, and I felt called to absent this absence. And I didn't write this from a place of bliss and joy. I wrote this from a place of frustration and anger and pain, right? And I said, I can no longer stand all these painful relationships that I have and see it in others. And there is something absent, and I have something to contribute. So that's the second method. The third method is the spiritual method, which I call ego transcending. So Eckhart Tolle's second book, A New Earth, the subtitle of that book is something like Finding Your Life's Purpose or Living Your Life's Purpose. So a lot of spiritual books now have this, uses spirituality, transcend your ego to discover your life's purpose. Because your ego, right, your false identity, your false sense of self and your sense of being separate from others in the world, as a short description of what the ego is, in a negative sense, often prevents you, this conditioning from really feeling what your purpose is. And so this is, can you be still long enough for the mud to settle, for the next action to arise naturally or from a state beyond ego. And so also A.A. Chalmers, the diamond approach, I think is very good. And some people call it from egocentric to ecocentric, right? Like, I forgot the name now. Anyway, there's several books of people. Bill Plotkin has a great book about that. And again, that depends a little bit on what level of consciousness you are. Some people do it through finding God. Then there are all the orange, rational books, skill books, and so on and so forth. And the final one is what is called the Ego Affirming Method. And interestingly enough, the ego transcending methods are mainly propagated by males, teachers, and resonate very often with males, but also with females. And the ego affirming methods are so like the Marianne Williamson type teachers, she being so like, and Jean Houston and others who have this like, you're already brilliant the way you are, you just have a fear of success, right? You're not shining your light fully into the world, even though it's already there. You just have to have the guts, you have to build up to your ego to go out into the world and to share your gifts. That's the ego affirming method, which is great for people who already have developed talents and skills and really have something to offer and don't do it because their ego is not strong enough, which is often the case in women, that they're not so sure. Of course, that's changing now in the world, but 20, 30 years ago when Marianne Williamson started, that was certainly the case. It's a disaster if people think that they have all these gifts to the world to give, but they have not developed any skills, right? And you get into some dubious certain healing modalities and this new age stuff, right? As we integral people say a little dismissively sometimes. So it's important to find the right method of these four, and the purpose guide can help you to find it and then work in this direction.
So we've contextualized this conversation with heterosexual couples, male, female.
Yeah, same for same-sex couples.
Okay.
So even though I'm unapologetic, and I even have a little sentence in my book that I say, look, I'm heterosexual. I wrote my first book for me. It's called A Manual for Men, but it was really a manual for me. And so I reserve the right to be unashamed heterosexual and to write from my perspective, because I'm not homosexual and certainly not lesbian. So there are great books out there, my friend. Names is always hard. The Missing Myth is called, the book is an integral book for homosexual men. Yeah. And the name will come to me in a moment. So, and I'm great friends with homosexuals and lesbian people who write and things like that. But I have several, feedback from homosexual and lesbian people who read my book and found it just equally useful, with a few small exceptions that are very different, gender specific, but in general, it's the same dynamic.
So, you talked about your dark night of the soul, which led you to write your first book.
Yes.
The challenges with that very publicly failing integral relationship, which led you to write your second book, and, lessons learned along the way. What would you say is your cutting edge place now? Not that you have to be in a dark night of the soul or in a failed relationship. But what's your cutting edge for your own personal development? So
first of all, it's another joke when I sometimes show my books. I said that I wrote after my first major failed relationship. This I wrote after my second major, and so I have some people who hope that I won't have another major failed relationship, because then the book would probably be like this thick. And there is some kind of truth to that, because the more we evolve, right, we may think the more enlightened and the more we grow and heal and develop, the more simple things get. But in truth, our inner complexity and the complexity of the world that we're sort of like creating or living in, increases, and therefore the relationships become more complex.
Yeah.
That's why we need thicker and thicker books the more we evolve. It's just like, if you have a bicycle, there's only so much that can break. If you have an Airbus or a jumbo jet, there is much more parts, right? And so more stuff can break. And
my favorite example of that as a symbol or as an analogy to that is Stuart Davis's song, The Ladder.
The ladder?
He actually sings that as you climb the ladder, it becomes even more shaky.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know that song, but Stuart is a hoot.
Yes.
Funniest guy in the world, at least from an integral perspective.
Yes.
Yeah, he's great. I'll check out that song. Yeah. So
where
I am now.
Yeah.
So maybe, one thing I can say, and that may seem a little bit unrelated, is, there's these 4 things to be unconsciously incompetent. So if with relationships, I was unconsciously incompetent how to have a relationship. I just modeled what my parents modeled, which was no longer applicable, even when I was a young man, really, right? It worked perfectly for them. And then you become consciously incompetent. Mm-hmm. So at one point, in my new age world, I realized I have no fucking clue what these women want from me. I just knew that I didn't know. And I became really curious what I had to learn. And then when I wrote Integral Relationships, I think I became consciously competent. So I went so that I knew I'd go in with my heart and my body, but my mind was very much always checking what is going on and in what quadrant are we right now and what level and what's the problem, and kind of like, where do we need to heal and learn, and is this another AFGO, another fucking growth opportunity, right, in the relationship, and things like that. So I became consciously competent, and now I feel I move into this 4th stage of being unconsciously competent, right, where I'm returning in a way to a natural way of interacting with other people without thinking so much about, what quadrant we're in or what level we're at. And it's just like, it feels much more embodied. And being almost 63 now, I'm feeling I want to teach as many other people to bring my work into the world as I can, because I realized, I can only be in Istanbul or in LA or in one place. And this is really a worldwide, has turned into somewhat of a movement, would be too much, but a worldwide interest. And since I'm really the only integral relationship guy, sort of like with the books and a real teaching. I mean, there's Keith Witt, who's a great therapist, integral, and my name brain is not very, Tom Habib, and the guy who wrote The Missing Myth for gay couples or gay people is Shil Herada is his name, just came back to me. That what I enjoy most is to work with people to kind of pay it forward. So we built the Integral Center here in Istanbul before COVID-19, and we had like 5 groups a week with about 20 to 30 people coming. Nice. And really working with people in Turkey in a totally different culture. I found so interesting, because I had, what came out of that is that we simply broke down the integral model in all these little, and it might come into focus in a moment. Let's see. In these little self-contained modules that people could just pick out and say, okay, this is, reading description, this sounds like I have a problem in a relationship. So instead of leveling the whole model at them, I had to come back to the car. If they say, oh, I feel I have a problem with the transmission, right? I just want to learn about the transmission. I don't want to learn about all the other parts of the car, because that's where I feel the problem is. then I said, yeah, we have a module just for dealing with the transmission. And then, by the way, if you happen to have a problem with the spark plugs down the road, right, then we have a module for that too, or speaking with the garden, right? So we broke it down, and I'm just like so much more interested to make this accessible now and to break it into pieces. And then when people go, oh, I want to learn about all the parts, then, I have offers for this too.
Speaking of accessible,
yeah.
how can people find out about your books, your online program to train the trainers, and such things that you're involved in?
Well, I would say, the most part is word of mouth. And of course, I have a website called integralrelationship.com. So singular, integralrelationship.com. And yeah, it's sometimes funny, that the less you kind of try to market yourself, the more people just find it on Facebook or the Integral Conference. And yeah, it's just,
so people come.
I'm not the greatest marketing guy in the world, but word gets around, and right now I'm very happy. COVID was a big bummer for me, because I really enjoyed these groups here and building the Integral Center. Then again, there was this, it wasn't the dark night of the soul, but it was like, fuck, now I'm stuck here. And the reason why I was here was that I can have these groups. And then I just had this idea about why not offer a Zoom online training, and people literally ran down my door. I'm still almost in shock about the interest and how great this group is going right now.
Is your cohort, does you start a new cohort at a certain time? Like, how does your cohorts work with people who want to come?
So it will be 26 weeks because we have 26 modules. So I broke down the integral relationship model into 26 embodied practices.
Nice.
So this is not teaching theory, but there's a little introduction, then people do an exercise, and then they share afterwards. So it's very different from the typical Ken Wilber sitting on the stage and talking at people for 2 hours, which is great for if you're very cerebral. So it's very embodied, and we teach people around the world to facilitate these 26 modules that you can read up on my website about. And we probably in a few weeks, we will start a new training because, people can no longer join the old training because we're in module 6 now. And so that will, I don't know how long this will go, but it looks like that's just what I'm doing now.
So someone could watch this today, someone could watch it a month from now, a year from now, and possibly join a cohort that's
right. That's beginning. Yeah.
That's what.
So no, we have 125, 130 people right now. I'm sure about 20 or 30 will drop out. And then we will probably, when we're in module 15, start a new training that begins in module 1 again.
Okay.
While the other people are finishing.
Is it mostly therapists and coaches? Like who are your clients who then become facilitators in your system?
It's amazing, spiritual teachers, therapists, coaches, just interested integral or lay people.
Okay.
But there is a center of gravity in therapists and coaches and some spiritual teachers who do this work. And it's an amazing group. So, because it's not this, I'm not a top-down teacher. I mean, I know I talked a lot, but what I enjoy there is that we're all contributing to the teaching, and it's very practice-oriented. So most of the time, the people spend in diets in Zoom to practice these things, they're getting to know each other, and there's this real amazing group dynamic happening where I'm usually always the one who learns the most. So when you facilitate groups, as you know, or you do these interviews and things, you always learn the most.
Yeah. These interviews are my excuse to meet some amazing people and learn what they're up to. Yeah. That's one of the many reasons I do them. So it's like my personal PhD.
It's a great gift you provide for others doing that.
So one more time, your website?
Is integralrelationship.com.
Awesome. Well, Martin, it's been great to talk to you. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
And I know it's late there in Turkey. So hopefully you have a good rest of your short evening. And
I
we'll
will.
talk soon.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And thank you for having you do. And thank you for listening to
You're welcome.
this podcast.